Question for you. Why can't we just delete all of the debt? $250 trillion, give or take, globally? Let's just take every country, every credit card, every Klarna, and just go, we're not paying it. It feels like a daft suggestion in a way, doesn't it? One of those questions where you think, we can't do that. But why? I mean, it's not like we haven't done it before.
Out these windows, you will view the collapse of financial history. One step closer to economic equilibrium.
This is the Rosetta Stone. You've probably heard of it. Its discovery let us decode hieroglyphics, because it's the same text in 3 scripts side by side. Hieroglyphics, Demotic, and Greek. But do you know what it actually says? It's a decree from Ptolemy V, ruler of Egypt at the time. Ptolemy, probably pronounced that wrong, but there's going to be a lot of that through this video. He was 13 at the time, and he celebrated coming of age by freeing prisoners, returning land to rebels, cutting taxes, and wiping debts. Really, the Rosetta Stone is an example of propaganda. It was him trying to show how great he was at a time that was pretty difficult for Egypt. And he might sound like a legend, but what he was doing here, this generosity, wasn't that abnormal at the time. In the earliest examples of written records that we have, we see mentions of debts being wiped. From ancient Sumer to Babylon and across Western Asia. It's even in the Old Testament. They called it a Jubilee. That was named after this ram's horn that they would sound to proclaim that the debt was gone. And it happened roughly every 50 years, which is why today a Jubilee means a 50-year anniversary, or a content format where one person gets screamed at by 20 people that disagrees with them. But anyway, debt wiping happened across cultures and across time. So I guess the next question is, why? I want to take you back to ancient Babylon for a second. Like 80% of the population, you are a farmer. Your life depends on a strip of land that you own and farm, and to work it you need to borrow. Maybe you need to borrow seeds, cattle, or a plough, and the understanding is that you'll repay the debt from these goods after the harvest. But one year, disaster strikes. Storm, blight, drought, whatever the cause, the result for you is the same. Your creditors want payment, you can't pay, so they take your land or you as a slave, or sometimes both. Babylonian scribes understood the concept of compound interest, a force that works both for investments and also crushes debtors over time. They knew that given enough time, all land would end up with just a few creditors. It was just an inevitability of that system. So that would leave most people enslaved or cut off from ownership. So these debt jubilees had 3 broad rules. Business debt stayed, it only applied to personal debt. Debt bond slaves, which included wives, sons and daughters given as collateral, went home. And the land returned to its original owner. You could just dismiss all of this as populism, but the reset was more than that. It was good economics. Freed slaves became productive again. They were earning incomes, maybe they started a business and they employed people. They would boost tax revenue. And returning land to people and making them owners again meant that they were willing to fight for that land and defend it. The Liberty Bell is the ultimate symbol of American freedom. Inscribed on its side, it says, "Proclaim liberty throughout all of the land." This is actually taken from the Bible.
Leviticus 25:10. Proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family.
This isn't freedom across the land, it's freedom through the land, by ownership of that land. The ultimate irony is America, the land of the free, is now one of the most indebted nations on earth. The key difference in how they viewed debt in society and how we view it today is back then they believed that the interests of the creditor, the person lending the money, should not be put ahead of society at large. They believed that this inevitable process of the lender amassing all of the land over the time was something that should be stopped, that the creditor's need to be repaid should never come at the detriment of the society's ability to thrive. So what happened? The simple answer is the lenders, they gained the upper hand. In ancient Greece, if you pushed too hard for debt cancellation, you ran the risk of being labelled a tyrant. Back then, tyrant simply meant ruler. But the creditors used it as a weapon to paint potential reformers as power-hungry. And if propaganda failed, well, there was always force. Sparta's kings Aias IV and Cleomenes III were both killed for trying to cancel debts and redistribute land. So debt cancellation became rare in the Roman Empire. And then it's argued that one of the causes of its eventual collapse was a debt crisis and the fact that wealth and land was concentrated in the hands of the elite.
Barbarians had always stood at the gates, but only as societies weakened internally were their invasions successful.
The fall of Rome led to the Dark Ages and then the medieval era, defined by feudalism. This is a system where nobility owned the land and peasants called serfs worked it. Instead of freedom through ownership of land, the land effectively owned them. Serfs were bound to plots of land, so when it was sold, they went with it. It's the exact opposite in a way of Babylon's model. I just love finance, you know. You think it's just coins and money, and when you dig into it, you realise that it's at the centre of everything we are and everything we've ever been. It's literally biblical in its influence. I've just swept through history there, and look, I'm no expert on it. I've relied heavily today on the work of Michael Hudson and Charles Goodhart. All of my sources are linked below for you. As well as being historians looking to document this period of financial history, Hudson and Goodhart look to explore if this could work in the modern format and how these debt jubilees might help us today. Let's start by first of all asking the question, shall we? Why don't we just wipe all the debt? Ancient rulers could forgive debts because the link from lender to borrower was a straight line, often the king himself. Today's system is far more complex with a lot more moving parts. But you could sum this up as, instead of a straight line, lending runs through intermediaries. Banks, building societies, insurance companies. There are financial institutions sitting in the middle. A common narrative that circulates at the minute in this tax the rich debate is that the super wealthy control all of the debt. It's partly true, they'll own a large chunk of it, but it's an oversimplification. UK government debt is about £2.7 trillion at the minute. 10% of annual spending goes just towards the interest on this debt. You could say then that taxpayers like you and me carry the repayment burden for that debt through the taxes that we pay. But who is on the other side of the debt? Who do we owe it to? Government bonds are the typical vehicle for how this debt is issued. They're the UK's IOUs. Institutions, other countries and individuals often buy them. According to Legal & General in 2023, around 1 trillion, which is roughly a third of the debt, is held in UK pension funds. That's your pension. The weird setup of our modern debt-based economy is that the government debt that will be paid back by you is also owned, in part, by you. Wipe the balance clean, you're going to wipe a load of money off your net worth as well. You'd also crush confidence in financial markets, stop the flow of collateral around the world, anger international peers, block access to global funding, and probably collapse the global financial system. End of days, fire and brimstone, Old Testament stuff. I mean, it'd be one hell of a show at least. But these financial middlemen, these institutions, allowed finance to scale. Banks don't just pass on deposits, they create money when they lend. Which means that the other side of the debt isn't just some rich guy who can take a haircut. It's the pooled, collected money of millions of normal people. A clean slate Jubilee would hurt us all. But that doesn't mean that we can't do something similar today. Researchers argue that there's a modern version of the Jubilee waiting for us. And as always, it's all about the land. Land is special. Unlike other forms of wealth, it's fixed. You can't move it abroad. It's as permanent as it gets, basically. It has another quirk as well. Most taxes reduce activity. You introduce a brick tax, people make bigger bricks so they use fewer of them. Bring in a window tax, buildings are built with less windows. Raise employers' NI, you get fewer jobs. But land is different. If we tax it properly, you don't get less of it, you get more of it. What I mean by that is you get more use out of the land. You remove incentives to just sit on land, and owners either need to develop it to outrun the tax, or they sell it to someone who will develop it. Here's a map of the Duchy of Cornwall. 128,922 acres across 19 counties. That's about a third of the size of Greater London or the size of Merseyside. It was created in 1337 by Edward III and always passes to the monarch's eldest son. Today that's Prince William, and it brings him about 21 million a year in income. Look, I'm not anti-royal. I am anti-constant scandal and sweaty nonces, but this kind of inherited land ownership shows a problem with land as a source of wealth. Prince William did nothing to generate this value. He was just born, and centuries ago some random bloke said, "That's mine," and that was enough to secure him that wealth forever. Imagine owning all this coastline here and charging anyone who wants to use it. The concept of it just feels a bit silly, doesn't it? Land existed before any of us, and it will be here after all of us. No one can claim to have created the value of the land. Actually, much of the value of the land comes from the community around it. Why is a plot in central London worth more than the same size patch in, say, Syria, Afghanistan or Haiti? Because of transport, schools, hospitals, and the safety under the rule of law, and the secure ownership structures that guarantee that that land is yours, all funded by who? The taxpayers. Land's value, in part, is created by the collective efforts of the people of the nation that land literally forms the foundation for. The writers of the paper call this type of asset a free lunch. But we can't just strip land off individuals and say it belongs to the people now. It would shatter the trust in ownership structure that ultimately gives the land a lot of its value. Although, I'll admit, I would love to turn around to the royal family and go, look, all that land that's yours, yeah, that's gone now. Buckingham Palace is getting turned into a HMO, but don't worry, we've got a lovely 3-bed council house in Manchester for you to live in. There's a Pizza Express down the road for Andrew. It was good enough for the actual royal family at the end of the day, wasn't it? Might be seen as a touch extreme, but it's great PR though. For a royal family who are a bit out of favour at the minute, ruling over a country with economic issues and a mountain debt pile, if they voluntarily just said, all this land that, we got given, you can have it back. Unlikely to happen though, isn't it? But is there a way that we can jubilee the value from the land without upsetting the landed gentry? Yes, a tax. A land value tax. Land value taxes focus on the unimproved value of the land. Build 50 houses on a field and you're still only taxed on the value of the field underneath it, not the value that the homes have added. That's why there's this incentive to develop the land. Critics will say that valuing the land separately from whatever's on top of it is hard. I mean, yeah, sure, that is a hard problem. But you know what else is hard? Going to work every day to provide for your family. Starting a business, that is hard. Spending your life trading your time for money is hard. And if we avoid taxing wealth that requires little or no labour, like land, we're then forced to tax the things that we do want more of. Entrepreneurship, productivity, businesses, work. In Denmark, they have a land value tax, and they value the land every couple of years, and then they publish the results for all to see. If we make the results public, everyone can judge if they're fair or not. So how much could we raise? Well, it depends on the design and setup of the tax itself, namely what you include and what you don't include. For example, you might say, let's exclude farmland, but then what about large estates that own multiple farms, such as the Duchy? So Prince William has tenant farmers who rent the farmland off him. Maybe main homes are excluded, or you have a tax-free allowance, but do you exclude second homes? Or maybe you don't exclude homes and you incorporate them all, but you get rid of council tax and then replace that with a land value tax. The design and scope of the tax will dictate how much revenue it can raise. We're likely going to need to phase this in over a few years as well to avoid shocks in the system. But let's just do a simple calculation. Denmark charges between 0.6% and 2.4%, but we'll just use a nice round number of 1%. The ONS estimates that UK land is worth about 6.3 trillion. That's about 3/5 of national wealth. 4.3 trillion of that is household land, people's homes. So let's say you leave households aside and we just tax the remaining 2 trillion. That's 20 billion a year initially. That'll likely go up over time as land values increase. It's a lot of money, but it's not loads in the grand scheme of things. Income tax alone raises 270 billion a year as a comparison. But it's not really about piling up loads of money. It's about the Jubilee effect of taking money from a free lunch asset like land and then distributing it back to people who have been cut out of ownership of the system. The paper argues that we should do this through support for first-time buyers, small businesses, and student loans. These three things represent areas of the economy that currently restrict people's ability to own a slice of the system that they contribute to, either through barriers like the cost of a home, the cost of an education, or the risk associated of starting a business, this idea of financial ruin. But, the land value tax in the property example, so this would also have an effect of likely reducing the price of land because there's now a tax associated to it, making house building cheaper, which could then soften any impact of support on the other side for people buying their homes, which might have the counter effect of pushing house prices up. The paper believes instead of loans that need to be repaid, the government should take equity stakes in the homes, businesses and incomes of individuals. Again, I've linked the paper below if you want to see their reasoning and how they propose that we do this. It's just the last few pages on this section and it's really interesting. But I want to broaden this out today and look at it from a slightly different perspective. So I'm going to make a video in the next couple of weeks ahead of the budget where I discuss areas of taxation that I would lean on to raise revenue, besides just taxing workers more. Broadly, I believe that we should tax, where possible, unproductive and harmful areas of the economy and reduce tax on things that we want more of. So let's tax the wealth held in land and use that to reduce taxes on labour. Reduce income taxes or NI for employees and employers to incentivise work. Maybe we could scrap stamp duty because that's a tax that reduces the movement of people, so it's anti-growth. I know that this isn't a magic fix. I don't think land taxes are a panacea, but it's surely better than squeezing workers and businesses even more than we already are, especially when so much of the land is in the hands of so few people. It's reported that between 50 and 70% of all of the land is owned by 1% of the UK population. The total amount of land owned solely by foreign interests not from the UK is enough space to fit 23 million average UK homes. Sir James Dyson has hoovered up enough land to fit 3,000 Wembley stadiums on it. Jubilees of old released people from the burden of debt and shifted land from the wealthy to the poor to reset the balance of the economy. Land value tax is a way to shift the incentives from sitting on wealth to creating it, from land to labour. The same labour that built this land that we all call home. England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales land. Built by hand from the ground up.